Fantastic. Well, welcome, Mark, and thank you so much for saying yes to joining me today for this chat, which feels like we've been trying to get it done for a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah. How are you?
All good. Yeah, very good. Looking forward to chatting.
Yeah. Good. Well, I love a chat. So before we start, I wanted to do a short introduction just to set the scene and put some context and some color behind the conversation. So afterwards, as ever, fact check me, let me know, thumbs up, thumbs down,
Yeah,
if you made some stuff up. Is that all right?
sure.
Excellent. So just for anyone that's tuned in, welcome back to Coffee with Kofi, which is the podcast where I sit down with inspiring people to talk about purpose, passion, and the journeys that shape who we become. Today, I'm joined delightfully by Mark Scott, a sports broadcasting professional who's carved out an impressive career in an industry not always known for its diversity. Over the years, Mark has worked with a number of organisations, including Global Media, on the BBC's Match of the Day. If you know anything about football, you know that's the go-to place to find the roundup of the day's sporting events or the weekend sporting events, as well as UEFA and a number of other illustrious organisations. What I'm hoping is that in this conversation, we will definitely explore Mark's journey, any barriers that he's had to break, be it external or internal, and the lessons that he has learned along the way. So grab your coffee if you can, if you're tuned in, listening or watching, or a glass of water, and let's sip into some inspiration. So welcome, Mark, once again. And how was that in terms of
all accurate, all good.
Yeah.
No need for any fact checking.
Brilliant, because I didn't do none. Awesome. So what I'd love to do is just start with some context, because some people will know of your voice, some people may well have seen your face, but they may not know the journey, that you've been on in terms of the start of it. So I'd love if you could give us like an elevator espresso shot of your story and where you started from, and then we could sort of get into how you first realized you had a passion for the field that you're now in.
Yeah, so I was very fortunate. I think in this sort of industry, which is very competitive, it seems to get more and more competitive every year, that you need a bit of talent, but you also need a bit of luck. And I had that when I was at university in Nottingham. And a guy that was on my journalism course happened to work for Capital Radio in London at the time. And that was a station that, being a Londoner, I'd listened to, and they had extensive sports coverage back then. And they were really the go-to place. People didn't really listen to Radio 5 Live in London. Capital was your London sort of go-to, because all the teams got quite a lot of coverage. So if you supported sort of a team that was lower down the food chain, like say a Leyton Orient or something like that, you get airtime. Whereas if you're listening to a national broadcaster, then you wouldn't really get the coverage. So if you were a Londoner, that was where you wanted to hear your football stuff. And I ended up living with Adam in the second year, and he was already working for them. And one day they needed somebody to cover a match down at Brentford. And he was like, do you fancy giving it a crack? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. This is sort of what I've always wanted to do. And did an okay job. And then that was the foot in the door. And that was when I was 19, and I'm 44 now. And from there on, it's just been a long and winding road with some setbacks, some positives. But it's not been sort of linear, because I started in radio and now I mainly work in television. But that was the sort of first opening that I had was when I was 19 at uni and got asked to cover a game for Capital Radio.
Oh man, that is awesome. I didn't know that. And I think it's so true what you say. It's like, excuse me, I think that, luck happens when preparation meets opportunity and you say yes, and I can imagine personally being asked to do that, having not done it before, and being like, I don't know if I can do it or not. And you said yes, and here we are. I can't even do the maths. 30 odd years later, doing the thing that you're doing, and brilliant. And what about growing up? Were you from Nottingham, or I mean, I can detect like the South London man than when I hear it. But
No, South London, basically like born in Tooting, but then spent the majority of my life before I went to uni in Streatham in South London, so not far from Tooting, so always South London. And then then 3 years in Nottingham at uni, and then back to London and here ever since, and still living in South London, different part of it now, but always been South.
And can I ask what team you support? Do you have a football team?
I do, but I tend to keep that quiet because otherwise you get accusations of favoritism and bias. But, you know, a lot of us football commentators have teams. You know, we're all passionate about the sport, but we generally sort of keep those cards close to our chest for professional reasons as much as anything.
Fine. When I next see you for a drink, I'll quiz you. I think I've got a couple of guesses, but I won't out you publicly, although that could be quite juicy. And background wise, in terms of like heritage and ancestry, I love growing up in South London for the fact that for me everybody was here. Like, you know, from school with the South Asian community, African, Caribbeans, like everybody was here. It was weird for me going to the Midlands where it was predominantly not like that. Big Asian community for sure, but it wasn't as cosmopolitan. But tell me a bit about your ancestry and background, really.
Yeah, so my mum is from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, and she's of Indo-Caribbean heritage because it's an island that feels, whenever I've been there, pretty evenly split in terms of the population with Afro-Caribbean and Indo-Caribbean. But so her ancestry is from India, the indenture, I think was 2 generations before hers, and she came over sort of not on the Windrush, but you know, her parents came over from Trinidad when there was a big influx of Caribbeans coming over to London, and you know, she now lives in Brixton, which is actually quite sort of a big hotbed of the sort of Windrush generation. But that's just by luck, because before that she was in Clapham and then Streatham and now here. But yeah, so she came over when she was very young, like, you know, before her teens, with her parents, and yeah, they built a life here.
Yeah, amazing. And have you got siblings as well?
Yeah. Oh, and I should say my dad is from he's half Irish, half English. So he came over here with his well, no, he was born here. His mother came over from Ireland, I think, when she was quite young. So yeah, so I guess if you're doing the math, you could say half Trinidadian, quarter Irish, quarter English is the full sort of like lowdown. And siblings wise, yeah, I'm the eldest, and I've got 2 brothers, 1 sister, so quite a big family.
Yeah, no, we see that Ghanaians, we be the same people, because I can't. I need many hands to count the number of siblings that I've got. So yeah, it's lovely when we can all get together from time to time. Thank you for that. So I wanted to explore early influences and touch upon some of the challenges, perhaps the opportunities too, I'm sure. But who are the people or experiences that inspired you early on to consider that? I mean, you mentioned Adam, so I get that, but for you to have said yes to that versus being a train driver or pilot or accountant, like when
I was very young, I was really into trains, and I think that being a train driver when I was sort of before I got to like the age of 10 was probably what I was looking at doing. Certainly that's what my mum tells me. But I think it was once I started to get into football and listening to football on the radio, like I say, Capital Gold, for people of my sort of age that grew up in London will be sort of very aware of the heritage of that station, which covered London football really well until they ceased their coverage in 2004. I think it started in like the late 80s, and the guy who set it up was a guy called Jonathan Pearce, who are now I work with on Match of the Day, although I say work with, we're never at the same game because the commentators are always at a match, but sometimes we see each other now and then at other places. But he set it up, and he was really the inspiration because he had a very unique style. you had kids in the playground, after an England game that he'd been covering, saying Euro 96, that would sort of be reenacting some of his trademark phrases. And he was a very different type of commentator, but he was sort of synonymous with me listening to the radio, sort of like to hear what was going on with my team and other teams that I was interested in. So that was probably one of the first influences, was listening to him. And then I think that you just start to pick up other commentators all the way through to this sort of very day. So it's, I don't know, he was obviously the first sort of really big influence on me, I would say.
Yeah.
For that, you pick up bits and pieces from lots of others as well.
Yeah, no, do you know, as you're saying it, I was getting goosebumps thinking like how that must feel to work with, albeit not always together, but in the same field as someone that you've grown up listening to, that kind of inspired you. Has that sunk into you, like, that you do that?
No, I mean, I think it's you're right. It is one of those things that is a bit of a pinch yourself moment, both in terms of working or being on the same program as people that you sort of grew up listening to and admiring and wanting to try and emulate. But then also sometimes when you're working with some ex-players, when you're doing sort of like co-commentary with them, I worked with Alan Smith, who used to obviously be a big striker for Arsenal. And I remember watching him on TV when he scored the winner in a European final against Parma as a young kid. And then, you fast forward a few decades later and you're sat next to them doing the commentary together. Same like I did a game with Paul Robinson, a few months ago, used to play for England. I remember watching England games in the pub when he was the goalkeeper. So there are sort of moments like that where you do sort of take a step back and think, well, this is a little bit surreal. So yeah, certainly I know where you're coming from, and I would agree that it's great, and sometimes it's a bit surreal is probably the best word to describe it.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And when along your career, were there moments when you ever questioned whether you could succeed in becoming a football commentator?
Yeah, and still have those sort of doubts now, because it's such a competitive industry, first of all, and you're always beholden to what one person thinks. Like, what's your favorite type of music?
Oh man, I'm eclectic, so I'm going to be difficult on that one. It will be garage 1 minute, it'll be R&B, it'll be drum and bass, then it'll be classical. So I go all over the place. It just depends on the mood that I want to be in, or
okay, well that's a good place to start then, because depending on what mood what type of music the executive producer or head of the channel's into, that could be whether they like a certain commentator, because one could be deemed as a classical, one could be deemed as more of a garage sound, one could be sort of rock or pop. So, and there's nothing like that's intrinsically good or bad about any type of music. It's all down to taste, isn't it? And it's the same if you're a commentator, that one executive might think you're the best thing ever, and then someone else takes their job and suddenly, your voice doesn't fit and you're moved on. So it can be quite cutthroat. And also the landscape these days is shaped by the rights that different organizations have. So, you could be working for a broadcaster that is covering the Premier League, and then all of a sudden they lose those rights, it goes somewhere else, and then there's no work for you with that broadcaster. So I think there's that side of it that keeps you on your toes, but also the fact it's so competitive and there's so many people coming through, that you are always a little bit wary, even now, even when you've sort of become relatively established and you're working for a lot of really cool organizations. But going back to the very start of it, you wonder how to make any inroads. It's difficult when you've got no back catalogue to try and get your foot in the door at places. There's a lot of speculative inquiries, a lot of emailing, a lot of posting out of demos, and all of that feeds into the self-doubt about whether it'll ever actually happen or not. And also, you might find, I was in the early stages of TV commentary, working for a company that provided commentary on the Polish second division for betting websites. and
Okay.
other slightly niche divisions, you know, like the Argentinian top tier, the Japanese top division, quite a lot of like South American football and things like that, which I was still earning, you know, enough to keep a roof over my head, but maybe I was aspiring to do things that were a bit more high profile. And when that wasn't happening, then you start to think, well, maybe it's not going to happen, that I'll get to that next stage and I'll be, you know, successful in terms of, you know, earning a living through what I want to do as a career, but not maybe hitting the heights that, you know, everybody has in their sort of like work life in terms of ambitions and aspirations.
Yeah, no, that's phenomenal kind of introspection of what it is to be it, because sometimes you might be forgiven from the outside looking in. It's like, okay, you get your first gig and then you just feel it's like a straight line trajectory to being established and staying there. But the fact that even to now, you know, you stay wary and considerate of, you know, the changing shifts in sentiment as to what is the flavor for now and for this station, who's got the rights and all of that stuff is quite a juggling act. So actually, how do you navigate all of that and I guess remain sane? That's really what I was going to ask.
Yeah, it's difficult because if you can tie yourself up in knots, worrying about it, but I think you just have to back yourself, be yourself, and you know, if the shoe fits, then great. If not, then you sort of keep on plowing on and try somewhere else, because you know you're not going to be to everyone's liking, and that goes for the bosses as much as it goes for the general public. Some people will, you know, really enjoy what you do. Other people will call you out and say, I really hate your commentary. And that's just the nature of the beast. It's a very subjective line of work, isn't it? It's not binary in terms of, say, you're working in finance and it's all down to your sales figures. You're either doing really well or you're not doing so well, because the numbers are there to basically tell the story. When it's something like this, which is why I use the music example, it's so subjective. It's just down to people's tastes and preferences and what they like to hear, what they don't like to hear. So I think you just have to sort of realize that it's out of your control. All you can do is be yourself, because you are marketing yourself, because everyone's got their own individual style. Don't try and be a copy of somebody else. Whether that works for you or not, you know, remains to be seen. But that would be one thing. And then the other is, you know, always being sort of on the lookout for new openings. Like there's new channels that are starting up all the time. There's new streaming services that are coming in. So, you know, messaging various people if you hear that they might have an opening coming up, and trying to keep your options open. And, you know, always, you know, I think it's the same as anyone that is sort of a freelancer in the creative industry. You're always looking for leads and always looking to sort of like connect with people that might have some openings.
Yeah, no, makes a lot of sense. And interesting, I'm going to ask you about the temptation, pressure, whatever you want to call it, to modify your style, you know, particularly where you will get feedback where I imagine they've gone with someone else or they prefer this sort of, like, was that something that had happened for you as you were sort of developing your craft?
I think that you totally sort of like think, oh, do they want that because they've hired that person? And you sort of think, can I try and imitate their style to get more work or to get an opening at that place? But I just think that that's a recipe for disaster, really, to try and imitate someone, because you're being something that you're not, and you won't be able to keep that act up all the time. So you may as well just sort of like accept the fact that that broadcaster, you're not for them, you know, and hopefully there'll be others that are for you. Like, you know, for example, the BBC have used me for a while now, so they're obviously relatively happy with what I do for them. There might be other broadcasters that I've tried to get some, you know, work with that haven't been interested, but that's cool, because like I say, everyone's taste is different, and you know, you never know what's around the corner in terms of who calls the shots at various places and what their particular tastes might be.
That is powerful. I'll be open with you. It's probably something that has only relatively recently come to the fore in my personal mind and work that I do in terms of really just being yourself, you know, because I think it's innate in human nature. I feel we're social creatures. We want to get on, we want to be accepted. And in your case, that being accepted means work or not getting work. And so when you say that, it makes me realize that actually you realize probably way before I did that you can't be all things to all people. So being yourself was probably the best bet, really, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Because, you know, people will quite rightly say that some commentators, and quite possibly myself included, offer too much of their personality, and they don't want to hear us offering, you know, not necessarily opinions, but just bringing our own sort of personality to the fore. But essentially, that's what differentiates each person, as well as your voice, because you know, the first port of call I think will always be, do I like the sound of this person's voice? That will be the first thing that somebody hears is, okay, that voice is for me or not for me. Then after that, it might be the style, type of language you use, how excited that you get for goals or how not excited you get for goals, if you're calm, if you talk too much, if you don't talk enough. So there's lots of things that come in that you can't really change your voice, so to speak. So that's something that you don't have any influence on. You can try and adjust the way that you do things, but I sort of think that, you know, you are just basically not selling yourself, but like you are the product. It's your way of talking about football that is what they're purchasing, essentially. And as I say, you drive yourself around the bend if you always are trying to tailor it for what you think someone might like, because you'll never know unless you get like a little spreadsheet back saying this is what we want, which doesn't happen.
No, it definitely doesn't happen. I can tell you that for free. It's the same in my line of work as well, you know, where, you know, you'll pitch for things, sometimes you'll hear and it'd be a polite no, sometimes you'll hear and it'd be a yes, sometimes you won't hear at all. And what can you do but keep going, really, is my thing. So thanks for sharing that. And look, I don't know whether it's relevant or not, but I'll ask it and then you direct me accordingly. But I wondered how being a person of color has shaped your professional experience within football, because football is weird and wonderful, but also, to me, representative of life. You know, it doesn't take much accessing my archives to see, you know, front page things and stuff online when the 3 Lions penalty misses happened and the backlash that came from that. But at the same time, when things do go well for, you know, black or colors, players of color. So I don't bring it in unnecessarily, but I did wonder whether you had a take on your personal journey and how that's been shaped in that arena, being a person of color, when sometimes I can imagine you might hear some very interesting chants, things said, etc., because football fans, they are creative.
They are. I think that from my point of view, it wasn't something I think I noticed that when I was first starting off, there wasn't, you know, a massive amount of diversity in press boxes and on commentary gantries or things like that. But I never felt that it was a barrier. I had because I was probably quite young. I think I just probably had a bit of curiosity about it. Like, was wondering why that was, rather than necessarily thinking, well, there's something intrinsically wrong here, or you know, thinking that there were any barriers to it. It was more just like I noticed it and just thought, oh, that's interesting, and didn't really have too much of a critical mind about it. And then the first time I did Match of the Day, I was chatting to somebody and they were like, I don't think there's ever been anyone of colour that has done a game for Match of the Day before. And so, like, one of my friends looked into it and I sort of went back through the names and I was like, I'm pretty sure, yeah, that there hasn't been. And it didn't feel like any kind of massive deal at the time. But then I was speaking to a guy called Leon Mann, who runs an organization called BComs, which is about trying to get people from sort of black backgrounds into the media industry and giving them sort of experience and education. And so I did a couple of workshops there. And I think the thing that I found interesting was speaking to some young black boys and girls. They didn't see it as a viable career path because they didn't see many people that weren't white doing it. I guess that feeds back to the classic, if you can't see it, you can't be it. I think that's the saying. I'm not sure if that's correct, but that's not a representation type thing. And obviously my name, Mark Scott, doesn't scream ethnic minority. My appearance probably doesn't either. So maybe if they see me or hear me, they wouldn't know that there is somebody who isn't, that is from a sort of ethnic background that is doing it. So I think that was the interesting thing for me. It wasn't so much during my journey. I was curious, but I didn't really think of it being a barrier. It didn't stop me. I was more worried about, you know, whether I sounded right or whether I used the right language than, you know, my ethnicity. But people of a younger generation, you know, the small sort of sample size that I've had, that was the interesting thing. And when people talk about a lack of diverse representation in say commentary, for example, I've always sort of said I don't believe there's any kind of problem with discrimination or anything like that. I think that the issue from my point of view, and I don't have the numbers to back it up, is that there's not enough people from diverse backgrounds that are trying to go into this industry because they think that it is viable, because see enough people from their backgrounds doing it.
Yeah, I'm glad that you sort of gave that perspective, because, you know, I have my lived experience, your lived experience, you know, starts and stops from born and raised in South London, right? Like it's different. And so that's the same for everybody else that will be listening to this now. And I'm glad that it didn't hinder you and there was that curiosity. And it's interesting as well what you say around the younger generation sort of coming up and like looking at it and thinking, maybe I won't apply, because when I look at the teams, the players, you know, there is supreme integration, diversity, and inclusion, and definitely support from the supporters when things are going well. Yeah. But when I look at the management of football clubs, let's just say in the Premier League, it's not reflective of the players that come through the system, which is an interesting one, because I can't imagine that there aren't a lot of players that don't want to coach who are of colour, but then they're not many that make it into that. So maybe not one for us to solve, but I can sort of see the duality and the nuance between what we see, what the realities are, and some of the challenges that may be there, if that makes sense.
And I think that, you know, something that I've mentioned before is that, you know, that it was the same issue with female commentators, which we didn't have really any of, you know, maybe 5-10 years ago. But we've had certainly, you know, there's two good friends of mine, Robin Cowan and Vicky Sparks, who are both regulars on Match of the Day now. And, you know, the fact that they are doing it and that they are recognizable as being female voices because of their names as much as anything. So when they're introduced, you know that this is a female commentator. And I think that has probably opened up the door for a lot of young girls to think, oh, I can do it because I hear them on there. Yeah. I think that there isn't the ability to know that there are people that are from ethnic backgrounds that are doing it. And that might mean that there are less people that feel that it is a viable career path. Whereas I think that, you know, and we've had other female commentators on Sky and on ITV as well. And I think that that representation helps to, you know, broaden the sort of diversity certainly in terms of gender in the industry, which has been good.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. And I thought to keep the conversation progressing, because there's some useful insights there that I've taken away around giving it a go and not letting the lack of visibility hinder you, which sounds like exactly what you did. And the fact that there are, certainly from a gender perspective, there are more people making that breakthrough, which suggests that the industry could be open to it. So all positive things, and long may that continue. I was thinking about, you know, pivotal decisions, and when you look back, you got the call from Adam. Was it plainish sailing from them once you had the experience? Because sometimes when I spoke to people in the past about transitioning or starting something, it's this chicken and egg thing where you want the experience, but you can't get the experience because you haven't got the experience.
Yeah.
But so you're sort of stuck in a way. But once you did that Brentford match, was it then easier for you to get further experience to build on?
Well, I think that it worked out well in that I was at uni doing a journalism degree, which was the closest thing I could get to a qualification that was related to commentary. These days, actually, you can do degrees in football commentary, which is crazy. But back then, broadcast journalism was the closest thing I could get to what I wanted to do. So I was on the course and I was covering, and then after doing that Brentford game, they used me, again and again, and then ended up doing games for them every week while I was at uni. So it was handy in terms of experience, doing more and more matches, going to games, being in the real world, and then also doing the academic studying of how to do it as well. So it was real life experience combined with still learning and getting a qualification in it. So it was perfect, really. And then I think it just opened the door, and I did more work for Capital, and then eventually got a full-time job with them. And then they closed their sports department sort of 4 years later. But by then I had a few more contacts, knew a few more people. So when I was made redundant, I could sort of like reach out and find some freelance opportunities. So as I said, it's a long and winding road. There were some knockbacks where, I applied for a job at a BBC local radio station, didn't get in there. Tried at a commercial radio station in the southwest, didn't get in there, but then picked up some handy freelance work and worked for some cool places. And that was basically the deal in that industry. There were very few football commentators that had full-time staff jobs, and I think that's still the case now. That a lot of us are freelance individuals. So I think it was a massive help because it was a foot in the door and it got me more experience. And like you say, it's a chicken and egg thing. And because I had more experience, then when a full-time job came up at Capital, I was in a good position to apply for it. And then while working there and meeting people and going to matches, when Capital ended their sports coverage, I was in a position to say to someone, "Oh yeah, well, I'm not working there anymore. Do you have any openings?" Yeah, it was a bit of a cumulative sort of experience.
I like that. The sort of compound effect of opportunities coming, being taken, and then evolving that way. One of the things I really love for this to be is just helpful to anyone who's trying to sort of navigate their way. It may be in what you do, it may be in something completely different, but where the path isn't clear, you talked about the winding path, but thinking back on it, what practical steps might you recommend to someone who's out there who wants to build their confidence and open doors in what may not be an obvious way in, like an accountant, you apply for this and then you study, become an accountant. Yours is different. Like, I think there's so many things that come into it, but were there any practical steps that you could recommend to help someone build their confidence on how they might open the doors to opportunity?
I think you need to sort of build up your air miles, so to speak, and you're in a confident enough position. So I was very fortunate that before I started doing the stuff for Capital, I was at a university doing a broadcast journalism degree. So we were rehearsing, doing mock broadcasts. There was a university radio station, so you could sort of get your learner's license through doing stuff on that. So that helped. And then the same with the TV commentary. As I mentioned before, I was working for a company who provided a lot of commentary for betting websites. And that was a really good way of a fairly low pressure scenario where you were still learning the ropes when it came to TV commentary, because it's a very different discipline to radio. So I was very fortunate in that way that I had two vehicles to sort of train me up and give me a little bit of experience before doing it in the so-called real world. These days, university radio stations, if it's someone who's very young and is, in the early stages of their formative sort of career lives, that's still a very good avenue to go down. If you're older than that and you're sort of post-university, then I sort of think that these days a lot of clubs, like even amateur clubs, will record their matches and stuff. And unfortunately, a lot of it, you'll have to offer your services for free to get maybe a bit of a foothold.
Yeah.
But I've always said to aspiring commentators that, find a local club, see if they have match footage and offer to provide the commentary to it. So you are commentating on a real game and it is being used by real clients. You might find that some of them are happy to pay. It might be a case that you do it for free, but you get yourself a demo and a show reel that then you can send off to places where you can get some paid employment. But it's all about trying to get as much experience as possible, because it's not the sort of thing that you can really learn at home without any actual sort of coverage to work with.
Yeah, that's really helpful actually. I like this idea of the air miles situation, but I also like the idea of being creative as to your way in, because for sometimes if you don't know, you don't know, and it might stop at, well, I've applied here, I've applied there, I can't get a job. But I think what I'm picking up from what you said is it's really building your skills, honing your craft, sometimes voluntarily, in order to have something to present that kind of, from an employment point of view, eliminate some of the risk of taking someone brand new on. Because if you've got a show reel out of doing voluntary work, there's something they can hear. And
precisely, it's a show reel for you, but also if you do it fairly regularly, then you are starting to learn the sort of art of what you're doing, because it's quite an abstract thing. Someone might be like, I want to be a football commentator on TV, but I've never done it before. And it's a lovely idea, but until you get to grips with how it works, what you're looking at, how to talk, when not to talk, what you do when there's a replay, what you do when it's showing like the full pitch, when they show a close-up of someone, until you sort of like get used to the nuts and bolts of it, it's quite an abstract thing. So you might be really passionate about football, you might have a really good voice, you might want to go and do it, but until you actually do it, it's not something that you can really quantify. So yes, there is the avenue of getting a show reel out of it so that you can go and look for some employment, but it's also just starting to get into the habit of doing it and learning the sort of structure of how that particular role works.
Powerful pointers. Thank you. The other thing that came up for me as you were talking earlier on was the nature of the work itself, because when you had the role of Capital, that was a permanent role, but then I think you'd said about, for many commentators, you operate on a freelance basis, which is not necessary for everyone. It's not necessary for the faint-hearted, not knowing month to month, week to week, where your source of sustenance is going to come from. So I just wanted to pick up on that, because in my mind, I just wondered whether there's any sort of mindset you have to develop around where is the financial resource to sustain my life coming from, when, do you know what I mean? Like how do you, like, what mindset or process?
It can be challenging. I've been very fortunate that I've always had enough that I've not been close to having to look for an alternative career. But I know that I'm very lucky in that case, and there's other people that have, lent on other qualifications that they've had to supplement the income that they get from working as a football broadcaster. And some still sort of like dabble with, maybe working in a bit of PR or communications and still doing the commentary as a sort of collective. But it's a tricky mindset. You might find yourself in a situation where you don't get a concrete agreement, but someone will say, look, as long as we have this contract, we'll probably use you once, twice a month, and then you think, okay, well, I know that I've got that. It's not in writing. There's no employment law involved, but you know, you can think, okay, well, I've got that coming in there. If I can pick up something there, and you know, you are looking at your diary, and some weeks it's busier than others.
Yeah.
But again, I think that is just the nature of it. I mean, football is a bit like that anyway. You think about managers, you know, sort of like, you know, short term, their sort of stays at various clubs can be. And if you're a player, you have a contract, it might not get renewed, or you might get sold. It's a very fast moving place. So I think that you just have to be aware of that. I think it was an eye opener for me. I assumed that, you know, if you worked in it, you got like a permanent job. And I think that there are some places that do have that. Like if you work for like a radio station, like I did for Capital, I was on a permanent contract.
Sure.
So that was fine. But a lot of us that work in TV, there's not really anything that's written. So it is something that you have to, I guess you have to have a certain outlook on it to be comfortable enough. But I've sort of, like I say, been lucky that so far it's not really got close to having to size up those options.
I'm with you, and I'm just thinking about the life of a solopreneur leading your own Mark Scott enterprises, the other skills that you've had to pick up along the way just to stay a going concern and, you know, stay in the game, so to speak, to go forward. Are there a few things that you could point to that would really be helpful to try and develop, you know, in terms of business skills?
You need to be a good people person, because I think that a lot of this is done on relationships and, you know, people trusting that, you know, they can trust you to do the job well. So I think being a team player is important, because you might be a really good commentator, but if you're maybe a bit hard work, then you might be less likely to be asked back. I've never like been told that as a fact, but that's just like the way that I would see it. You know, you have to be good at the admin side of it, you know, in terms of you know, a lot of the stuff that I do, you book your own travel, your own accommodation. So, you know, you need to be quite good budgetary wise, because if you're spending more on travel and accommodation, there's less profit at the end of the day when you're doing the tax return. So there's that side of it as well. So you just have to, you know, it's not the same as if, you know, I was running like I don't know, a traditional business where you've got to have a lot of extra strings to your bow if you're a one-man band, so to speak. But there are additional things on top of just the commentary if you are, you know, your own boss.
100%. Because the way I see it, it's your product, your service is, you know, your voice and the way that your knowledge of football and the way that you deliver that. But behind the scenes, you are finance, you are also marketing, you are also the sales point of contact, you're also operations to get you to where you need to be.
One thing that I did before, which I don't have anymore, was, you know, set up my own website to put show reels on there and CVs and contact details. And, you know, I know a lot of people in the industry who have that, and it's very successful for them. So, you know, there's all those sort of additional things where you are basically trying to sell yourself as a product, which is such a weird thing to sort of think about, but that is the game, essentially.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, well, thank you for sort of running through some of those things. And I'm a fan of relationship building, and so I'm glad that we align in terms of that being something that you led with, because I think people ultimately buy people. I know it sounds a bit transactional, but if you know someone, you like them and you trust them, you're more likely to want to work with them, is the sentiment that I was picking up from what you were saying, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. So we're making good progress, my man. So just a couple more questions or so.
Sure, back on,
All right, amazing. I wondered about the role of allies and networks, etc., for you, because, you know, doing what you do as an individual, you know, you talked about Jonathan Pierce at the beginning, you work on the same program, but you'll rarely see them. So in the way that a lot of people that work in the corporate environment will have colleagues that they see every day, they've got people they can bounce ideas off. How important have mentors, sponsors, or like supportive communities been in your journey? Because I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, I've never had an organized like mentor or sponsor. I think that it does happen, and I've sort of like been asked before to have chats with young aspiring commentators or people that come on like a shadow shift to watch you at work and learn the ropes and see how the practical side of the job works. But you do develop a little bit of a don't know what the right word is, like a crew of, you know, other people in your peer group. So other commentators that you'll see, you'll work maybe on tournaments together. You'll do sort of like long away days. For example, if, you know, I've done a game at Newcastle and then you're traveling back, you know, and it's someone that's works for Sky, you might crack open a few beers and it's a 4-hour train journey. And then you stay in touch. And then the next time you're at a game, you sort of say, oh, do you want to go back to, and then you sort of build up alliances and friendships that way. So I'm quite lucky that there's a lot of really cool people in the industry that I'm friends with, and it's great because, you know, you can talk about ideas, you can have a bit of a moan if things, you know, haven't been going well, or if you've just been a bad game, or if you've had a tough time, you know, sort of interviewing somebody after the match and they've chewed you up a bit, and, you know, you can sort of like discuss that with each other. So there is a good network of people in the industry that we all sort of bounce off of, you know, and like I say, funnily enough, I don't see many of the other guys from Match of the Day because we're not at the same games, obviously, because we're all sent to different matches. But sometimes, you know, you will see them, but there's loads of other people, and there's no like real sort of like rivalry in terms of when you're chatting to people who work for Sky or TNT or TalkSport or any of, you know, the like everyone gets on, and we know niche job, so we work, you know, weekends, which has its challenges social life wise, and yeah, you know, and normally always working on Boxing Day. This year was a different one because there was only one Premier League game, but there is a really good, tight-knit bond, I would say, amongst the commentary sort of like fraternity.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm glad that you've got that, because I do sense that I feel we're social creatures by nature, and so sometimes having a role in a company where you can go in and you can find those sparks of connection through conversation is nice. But it sounds like you've found a way, even though it's not structured, to find people that you can connect with and share experiences with, which is lovely.
Yeah, I mean, it can be sometimes a bit of a lonely experience because you might just be, you know, sat at home doing all your research, and then you go into like a studio if you're not actually at a stadium, go in, do a game, don't really speak to anyone, go back. Certainly during COVID, that was the way of the world, which was pretty bleak. But then, you know, that part of the things that we missed as commentators was, you know, we were still going to the matches during COVID, but obviously it was very regimented. There was no press room, and that's normally the place where you'll sit down, you'll see people, you'll have a bit of a gossip, you'll have a catch up, find out how people's families are and chew the fat. But when that all went during COVID, we really noticed it because we were still going to the games, but there was that lack of social interaction. And a lot of us, that was the only sort of social interaction that you have on a work basis.
Yeah.
Because we're not in offices and, you know, we're not working with teams, even to the point where you're not like on a Teams call like a lot of remote workers are, where you actually still have your network of colleagues and stuff like that. So, you know, it can be, depending on what your sort of schedule is like, it can sometimes be a bit of a sort of a lonely existence, but there's also a very strong bond amongst the community as well.
Yeah, well, I'm glad. And tough times, man. I can't believe COVID is a thing that we experienced and went through in our lifetimes. It feels semi-distant, but so unreal. Like everything that happened with that, around being able to connect and do the things we take for granted, like hang out on the weekend and stuff like that. We couldn't be doing that. So just a couple more questions, Mark. So as much as you can, knowing that the wind blows the way the wind blows, I was keen now that we started 2026 to hear what lies ahead for you, both professionally and personally, you know, for the year ahead. Do you, yeah, what, I'll leave it at that. What lies ahead?
Well, I'll be working on the World Cup, which will be really cool.
Nice.
So really looking forward to that. Yeah, don't know where I'm going to be yet or what matches I'm covering, but just being part of a big tournament like that will be lots of fun. And yeah, just, I mean, it all seems pretty steady in terms of, you know, the domestic season, working for Match of the Day, which I love. That's still a massive buzz for me every game that I work for them for. And, you know, personally, I think that there's always room for development and, you know, away from work, you know, trying to, you know, improve mental well-being is always, you know, is always a key thing. So maybe, you know, spending a bit of time on that, you know, reading, going to events and things like that, and just trying to, I mean, I think that sometimes it can be quite full on. Like I know that I'm very lucky to do what I do. If you like football, it's a great job. And, you know, I'm not working in a hospital or, you know, doing something that is proper life or death. But sometimes you can feel a bit burnt out from watching a lot of football. So I think trying to get that balance right with taking some time out from it is something to work on as well. Just because then, you know, it's good for your mental state, but also it means that, you know, you still retain that enthusiasm for your work when you're sort of going into it.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, you and I talked about it before, but when we like something, we really like something, and you know, you can. It doesn't feel like work when you're really enjoying it, but at the same time, I'm a massive believer that variety is the spice of life, and in some way, shape, or form, it sort of sparks our creativity in other ways, because you can see the interconnectedness, if I can say the word, interconnectedness of different things that might be interesting to you, and different cultures and people and all of that good stuff, really. So I hear you on that. Yeah. Last but not least, a bit of a chunky one, because if you haven't thought about it, I'm putting you on the spot. But what legacy, big word, do you hope to leave for future generations of professionals? I guess particularly diverse professionals, or people from South London, or anywhere really, anyone that would ever think, God, I don't know if I could do that. Like, what would your legacy be if you could pick one on the spot right now?
I think if there was ever like a young version of me that thought that it was an industry that they weren't able to get into, if I open the door for one person from a similar background to me, then that would be a massive achievement. And just that you hope that you know, some people when they watch a game enjoy what you've done, because, you know, it's not about you, but obviously you do provide the soundtrack. So if you get to call one monumental goal for any team, and they always remember that, and they liked what you said about that goal or about that penalty save, and it's special for them, then that would be quite a nice legacy to have as well. If you're always associated with that particular moment for that team, that would be pretty cool as well.
No, that is awesome. And actually, again, the goosebump feeling is coming from me, because I think you do that. I think you do that anyway, every day that you do commentate, because it is, like you said, I never thought of it, but you are the soundtrack. You know, like when you go raving, you used to go raving, so, and you hear the music.
Although you're not always the soundtrack people want to hear, and then they'll put you on mute. So it goes both ways, you know.
I hear you, but I'm just thinking, and you know, particularly with the World Cup coming up, but just those big tournaments, but also like the relegation battles or the race for the top. Like when you're commentating on that, people will remember the time when we won or we lost and we didn't make it, and the things that you said that connected with them. So yeah, that's a cool job you've got there. You know, I never thought of this before. It's pretty awesome. It's pretty awesome.
As long as you do it well, it is. But like I say, it can be a very subjective industry as to whether people think you're doing a good job or they just want you to shut up. So you just have to be very phlegmatic about it, I think, and do what you do. And you know, some people are going to like you, some people aren't going to like you. But if you do manage to nail a particular moment, and you know, it's something that people will want to go back and listen to, and they're like, oh wow, yeah, I remember that. You know, like I say, it's never about you. It should never be about the commentator. People don't watch games because they're like, oh, that commentator's doing that game, I'm looking at that match. They watch because they want to see either their team or it's a match between two sides that they think is going to be an entertaining one to see. But if you can sort of like do something that people really like the sound of, then that's a nice sort of legacy, if you can call it that, to leave.
Yeah, no, it's a juicy word, but I think we've captured the essence of it. And so for me, nothing more to do but to say thank you so much for sharing your story, like with openness, honesty, but also a strong dose of humility, you know. And I think there's so much in there. I love watching these back because I'm in it now. Like, I can't really process it. I love watching it back because I think there'll be stuff in there for anyone that's navigating a path that is less conventional and structured, who wants to chase a passion that doesn't come with a clear roadmap, you know. Yeah. So I hope for everyone that's listening, it's resonated in some way, shape or form, and that they take something away from it, if nothing else, just the persistence, luck, having a purpose and a community like really do matter. So yeah,
100%.
Thank you so much. Anything that you want to close with at all before we draw conclusion to our conversation?
I think you summed it up perfectly there with the way that you sort of wrapped up about the persistence, luck, the community, like that all sort of like feeds into it perfectly.
Brilliant. Well, no, thank you for saying yes. I'm glad that football paused today, so you and I could do this chat. Yeah. We've been trying, but
no, and yeah, now I need to get my head down because it's games Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. So that's the back to the grindstone now. Been a nice break away from doing my statistical notes on all the matches ahead this week.
Oh, brilliant. Well, you know I'm here for it. So anytime, man, anytime. Add me to your community. Yeah. You know, I love it.
100%. Great to see you, mate. It was good to see you on Saturday as well. I think I saw the invite to Budapest. Unfortunately, I don't know if I'll be able to make it because that will be when the football season's in full swing again. But I'll do my best to try and be part of that as well. And if I don't see you before, I'll see you at Nico's birthday drinks, which are in I think 4 or 5 weeks' time. Unless there's another social coming up before then,
we can make it work. We can arrange our own.
Yes,
we can make it work. So I'm here for it. Free range chicken as you are. So when there's a window, you know, I'm down for it. Chief Vibes Officer, I'm here for it.
Lovely stuff. All right, Kofi. Good to see you, mate.
All right, Mark. Take care.
See you later.
Bye.